Hello, my name is Chris Burns, and on behalf of the Irish Canadian Cultural Association of New Brunswick, I welcome you to the 2020 production of Tellabration. Originally envisioned in 1987 by Connecticut storyteller J.G. Pinkerton as an evening of storytelling for adults, the scope of Tellabration has expanded over the years and around the globe. From a single event held each year on the Saturday before the American Thanksgiving, it now includes a month-long array of events that build appreciation and advocacy for the art of storytelling. 2020 marks the 15th year that the Capital Area Chapter of New Brunswick Irish Association has hosted a Tellabration event. It also marks the first year that we have gone virtual and invited participation from other chapters around the province. As a result, tonight's storytellers will be representing Bathurst, St. John, and the Fredericton area chapters. At this point, we are pleased to present a few words from the Honourable Tammy Scott-Wallace, Minister of Tourism, Heritage and Culture for the province of New Brunswick.
Stories have an important place in preserving culture and passing on cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. They shape how we think about the world and live our lives. I worked as a journalist for 25 years and I know the power of the stories we tell. They allow us to share emotion and find common ground with one another, help us to connect and communicate. Thank you for helping keep our cultural traditions alive through captivating storytelling year after year, and congratulations on your 15th year of hosting a Tellabration event. In the name of storytelling, Saturday, November 28th, 2020 is hereby proclaimed to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling during the month of November across 6 continents in 60 states and 9 countries. From Sacramento to St. John, Bathurst to Barcelona, West Virginia to West Indies, Fort Worth to Fredericton, over 300 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. Without further delay, in joy and anticipation, let the stories begin.
Without further ado, I would like to introduce Helena Hook. Helena Hook was born in County Westmeath, Ireland, and immigrated to St. John, New Brunswick in the 1970s with her husband and children. A graduate of UNB St. John, she is a retired business owner. She enjoys writing and is a member of Seaside Scribes, a St. John writing group, and also participates in a weekly prompt group. Her stories and poems have been published in the Irish Canadian Cultural Association of New Brunswick's publication, The Shamrock Leaf, that was long, as well as in the anthology, Sharing Our Stories, and in a number of St. John Fog lit journals. She is interested in the poetry and folklore of Ireland and loves to write about the human condition. As a current board member and past president of the ICCA and past chairperson of the St. John branch of Cultus, she has been involved in promoting the culture of Ireland for the past 35 years.
Jeez Marie Galair. Hello. The story I'm about to tell you is a memory of the travelling people of Ireland who in 2017 received state recognition as a distinct ethnic group by the Irish government. But back in the 1950s, they were commonly called the Tinkers. This was a time when the travelling people lived on wasteland on the outskirts of every small town in the country. My first vision of them was when my mother took us as small children out on the long summer walks to the lake, that's Lough Ree in the centre of Ireland. About a mile out of town we passed the Tinkers' caravans parked on the grassy banks at the edge of the dusty road. The sign of their harsh way of living was visible in the scraggly children huddled beneath the bushes in the shade, while others picked berries along the hedgerows. I saw the washed clothes draped haphazardly over the prickly hedges to dry, bicycle wheels and scrap metal scattered around on the ground. A man cross-legged on the grass, tapping the last touches to a tin mug with his mallet. A woman suckling a baby, tucked inside her shawl. Well, this was also a time when many tradespeople delivered their wares or services to the terraced houses in our small town, including the home where I grew up. The frequent Rap, rap of the front door knocker heralded the arrival of all the different people who called: the bread man, the milkman, the turf man. My mother lit a turf fire every day, even in the summer. She said it would cheer the house up. And the fishman came every Friday, and then we had the dreaded weekly rent woman collecting her 7 shillings. And then, of course, there were the tinkers. One summer day, my mother sat in the kitchen at her old treadle sewing machine, hemming curtains, when a loud rapping noise resounded down the hall. The smooth rhythm of her feet stalled. She stopped pedalling and hurried to the front door to answer the urgent knock. Rap, 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 the door knocker clanged once more just as Mother opened the door to a robust tinker woman wrapped in a multicoloured shawl of red and green and purple. Her hair, black as the coal in the scuttle, hung in a long matted plait down her back. It switched from side to side as she shifted her weight to delve inside her brightly woven woolen shawl. She produced a bundle of elastic from somewhere inside that garment that concealed most of her body. "Hello, missus. God bless you, missus. Would you ever buy a few yards of elastic for me?" she said, and appeared to unravel yards and yards of the stuff over one hand, rewinding it with the other with such speed that it was difficult to detect which hand was winding and which hand was unwinding. Mother hesitated. Well, I don't think I need any." "Well, I see you sew, missus," the tinker woman interrupted, eyeing the sewing machine down the hall. "You know, this'll come in handy, missus, when you want a bit of elastic for the waist of a slip or a pair of knickers, you know, for one of the little ones. Just 4 yards in it for sure, maybe 5. And I'll throw in a blessing for your family for good measure." "Oh, well," Mother was worried. "How much are you asking?" said Mother. "Only 2 shillings, missus, and the blessings of God on ya." Mother reluctantly dipped her hand into her apron pocket, found half a crown, which she had just received for hours spent making a dress. Well, here you are, and you better give me 10 blessings while you're at it," Mother said, glancing back at the 4 little ones playing marbles on the floor. "And there's herself here," she said, looking at me, "and I have 5 more playing outside." "Well, missus, aren't you the great woman yourself? Sure, and I'd give them all a blessing, and a special one for yourself too, for giving me the extra 6pence. Now, if you could just do me one little favour and boil the kettle for a sup of tea. Sure, and we dying of the thirst on the hot day that's in it." Well, noting she said we, Mother looked across the road and saw 2 other tinkers knocking on doors and a few others up the terrace. She spotted 2 dishevelled children standing barefoot by a pony and cart. It was loaded up with a hodgepodge of bric-a-brac. There was scraps of iron and metal and pots and pans, an old bicycle wheel, and some rags in a corner. "We're cooking in our skins, that's what we are, the Lord save us. Do you know, missus, there's nothing better to quench the thirst than a good sup of hot tea," exclaimed the rosy-faced tinker. "Well, come back in 10 minutes and I'll have the tea made," said Mother, looking sorry for the thirsty, untidy tinker and her barefooted begging children. Mother boiled the kettle and soon handed over the big pot of tea. "Thank you, missus. You're a saint, she said, wiping the sweat off her brow. "Now, missus, could you do me one more little favour? Could I beg you to fill the baby's bottle up with a sup of milky tea?" My mother's eyes opened wide with surprise when the woman pulled back her shawl to reveal the sweaty, round face of an infant who looked flushed and whose fine black hair was matted with perspiration. As soon as Mother obliged with the milky tea, the tinker woman anchored the bottle in the folds of her enormous garment and propped it up to the baby's mouth. She left humming my mother's praises. "Holy Mother in heaven, now there's a saint to be sure. May God bless her house and her family, and may she never want for a penny." Back in the kitchen, Mother was about to take up her sewing when she was drawn back to the window by a cackle of noise. To her embarrassment, a whole band of tinkers in mismatched tattered garments had congregated directly in front of our house and were having their lunch, accompanied by Mother's big pot of tea. There was more than a dozen men, women, and ragged children all strewn out along the path The men in oversized jackets with holes in the elbows, the women in rumpled skirts and old shawls and hues of dark blue and rust. Some sat by the road, others stood and swilled back the tea from their own handmade tin mugs. A few sat on the edge of the cart with old rags for cushions, all at various stages of unfolding crumpled brown paper to expose thick, rough-cut sandwiches. Lord, have mercy on us. Where did they all come from? What will the neighbours think? Mother was mortified, her face crimson with embarrassment, yet she couldn't help feeling sorry for the way they had to make their living going door to door begging, even though she also knew that a few of them had a reputation for stealing and were notorious for stretching the truth. Well, after 2 more refills of the big teapot, the tinkerwoman promised to bring Mother a few tin mugs the next time she was in the area. Mother had noticed Mrs. Gavin, the widow next door, peek through her white lace curtains to see what all the chatter was about. She knew that the fussy widow would not approve of encouraging tinkers in the terrace. Neither would the neighbour across the road, who liked the quiet life since her children were grown up and gone. Well, that's all right. I have enough mugs at the moment, said Mother, not wanting to encourage this as a regular habit. Well, Mrs., you're a great woman. God bless you and all your family. Now here you are, Mrs., a flower for your trouble. And with that, the tinker produced a delicately hand-carved wooden flower from the depths of her magical multicoloured shawl. Mother gasped at its beauty. It resembled a large chrysanthemum, with its finely carved daisy-like petals, which were curled back and tinted in vibrant shades of yellow and orange. Thrilled with the detail of the flower, Mother placed it in a brass vase on the sideboard, where it stayed for many years. The tinkers gathered up their wares, their thirst was quenched, their hunger staved, and their pockets full of shillings. They departed in a noisy procession from St. Francis Terrace. The children skipped along on their bare feet, knocking a tune on their tin mugs by tapping them with small stones picked up along the way. The women pulled their woven shawls tightly across their bodies to conceal products and things that they had collected, little treasures that they would sell in the next street. The procession was now out of sight. Mother decided it was time to measure the piece of elastic for which she paid her hard-earned money. Remembering the tinkerwoman's words, "There's 4 yards in it for sure, Mrs. Maybe 5. She placed the measuring tape to it. The measure stopped at 54 inches. 1.5 yards was all that was there. Mother shook her head in resignation. She smiled, went back to her sewing. She hummed softly as her feet beat out an easy rhythm on the foot pedal of the old singer. Through the kitchen window, a sudden ray of light illuminated her hair and the fabric of the new yellow curtains, causing the material to sparkle and glisten in the afternoon sun. She laughed as she said, "You can't be up to these tinkers and their tricks. Still, it's better to have a blessing from them than a curse." And that, my dear friends, happened probably over 60 years ago, and I'm so glad my mother made those pots of tea. May she rest in peace, and may the travelling people be blessed in everything they do. Slán agus bannacht. And now for a nice cup of tea.
Without further ado, I would like to introduce Kevin Mann. Kevin, a former mayor of Bathurst, New Brunswick, my hometown, taught English in local schools as well as Sierra Leone, West Africa, Sri Lanka, China, and recently retired from Arizona Western College in Yuma, Arizona. In 1983, he was the founding vice president of the Irish Canadian Cultural Association of New Brunswick. Kevin enjoys writing in his retirement and currently enrolled in a playwright course through the Irish Arts Center in New York City. His play, The Last Irish Wake, has been presented in English and French by the Vagabond Theatre Company 8 times over the last year and a half. He is active in the Bathurst chapter of the ICCA. Please welcome Kevin.
Hello there, my name's Kevin Mann, and I'm here to tell you a couple of stories while I have a wee one. I've been asked by the Bathurst chapter of the Irish Canadian Cultural Association to tell you some stories today. And I'm going to talk about 2 individuals of Irish background, Irish Canadians, both quite different in their characters, but I hope you will agree with me that are both heroes, actually. What is a hero? Well, we have heroes widely admired. Some have achieved something great. Some show exceptional courage, valor, gallantry, conspicuous bravery. But I'd like to add something today, and you can tell me or agree later if you wish, that there is a nobility of purpose in the 2 characters that I'm going to talk about. A little bit of historic perspective. Well, Ireland was multicultural as it is today. A lot of historic migrations, starting with the Celts coming in from Central Europe and moving up into Ireland, Scotland, and England and other countries. After the Celts, the Danes or Vikings from Scandinavia come in, and they actually establish communities like Dublin and Limerick and others along the coasts. We have the Anglo-Normans coming in with an invasion in the 12th century. Later, the Scottish plantations coming over from Scotland to the northern parts of Ireland. In the Middle Ages, we have even small communities of German Palatinate, French Huguenots come into Ireland, and Anglo-Irish, and that's who I'm going to be referring to today. Anglo-Irish coming in around the time of Elizabeth I's reign about 500 years ago. Now, another date, 1815. The Napoleonic Wars have just finished. The Battle of Waterloo, it's the end of Napoleon Bonaparte in his world conquering ambitions. And as a result of the end of that war, Ireland went into a deep economic depression, as did other countries. The war economy was gone, but however, New Brunswick was booming. It was opening up, there were land grants to be acquired, and the timber and the lumber business was ruling. So that gave opportunity for people to come here to the Bay of Chaleur area, northern New Brunswick, and many came from Bandon, the area, Bandon City, and around Bandon from County Cork in Southern Ireland. And they came into the Bay of Chaleur and settled near the Bathurst area in communities like, well, further eastward, about 20 minutes away, we have the community of New Bandon, Stonehaven, Clifton, Canopy, Janeville, Teggs Brook, Salmon Beach, across over to Yohal, another Irish community in that same area. And then up the Teddygush River, we have South Teddygush. Now, all these communities, and including folks in Bathurst, were of the Anglo-Irish culture. And they were Anglican, or Church of England, and Methodists by and large. And all those communities I mentioned were interconnected through marriage, agricultural enterprises, and trade. So my 2 individuals today, and that's why I'm wearing orange. Of course, it's part of the tricolor flag, and an orange banner here, and even my bow tie as I try to, 2 historic individuals of heroic quality, I believe, that came and were affiliated with that culture. The first person, and this fits with the timeline because he lived before the second, and that is William End. And I'm wearing a top hat because William End became a lawyer at 23 years of age in New Brunswick. And then he moved to Newcastle, and he was there around 1825, and a few years later, in 1830, he runs for the New Brunswick Assembly and gets elected to represent Gloucester County. He had a terrific battle in knocking off his adversary, the incumbent, and his name was Hugh Monroe, a loyalist who had established, about 30 years before this, quite a mercantile system. And he was using his political connections, according to William End, for the betterment of himself, that would be Hugh Monroe, and his cronies. They were making laws that really were to the advantage of a small group of business interests. So along comes William End, and it is a quote where that he was a loquacious and impetuous partisan of the common people. In other words, he was a little bit verbose and perhaps overconfident in his character. However, while he was at Newcastle and before he moved to Bathurst, he started and was part of the leadership for an Irish benevolent association. And this Irish association in the Miramichi, their prime purpose was to help the immigrants reestablish themselves up to perhaps the first year of settlement, as they needed aid to get started. So we see a little bit of nobility of purpose there in William End. Then he comes up to Gloucester County, represents the common people, gets it away from that family compact, and now can represent the vast majority of people who supported him, the Acadians and the Irish, laborers, small business people, small farmers, I should say, and fishermen. Well, that's William End. To show you an example of how he helped those people that supported him, here he is endorsing a land petition in 1839, just 9 years after he was elected, and John Reardon of Pokeshaw has applied for a land grant of 100 acres so he can have his land grant beside his brother Patrick. So here End endorses the grant, and he writes, and this is in his own words, "I cannot refrain from laying the case of this unfortunate petitioner before His Excellency. He has a sickly wife and 7 children, all dependent on his labor. About 4 years ago, he was caught in a snowstorm, and all his toes fell off. In this condition, he continued to cultivate the clearance for the support of his family. He got a little bit better, and at length was able to go into the woods for firewood. While there employed, a tree fell upon him and broke his left arm. He is a hard-working and sober man and determined to die rather than to apply for aid to the parish. When his arm began to mend, his feet continued so painful that he was, for several months, unable to stand. Notwithstanding this accumulation of misery, he has persisted in supporting his family, and as I am credibly informed, has frequently been seen at the earliest dawn of day, assisted by his eldest child, a girl of 10, he on his knees, his left arm bound up, hoeing his potatoes with the right, unable either to stand or use his arm." Well, surely the Reardon family of that time and today consider William End a hero. I'm going to, by the way, keeping with heroic actions and who becomes a hero, William End died in his own home in 1872 by a fire set by an arsonist. William End, in fact, was assassinated by somebody disgruntled with a judgment that he had made in the line of his work. He was a justice of the peace, a magistrate, and somebody set fire to his home, and he died in his office, in his home, in 1872. William End, hero. Let's move on to another hero who is in another time period. So I'm going to change hats here, just in keeping with storytelling. And another man, not born in Ireland, but his grandparents were born in Ireland, and they were part of the Anglo-Irish wave. that had come earlier in the 19th century. Lance Sergeant Herman J. Good, Irish Canadian, Victoria Cross winner. I have a photo of Mr. Good here. He died in 1969. And I'm going to refer to the Northern Light. We'll start with the end of his life in April 1969. Herman James Good, VC, Bathurst's greatest war hero, died early Friday morning. Mr. Good, 80, was one of only 2 Victoria Cross winners, the Commonwealth's highest military award for valor in New Brunswick. And there beside Lance Sergeant Good, you can see on the iPad a representation, in fact, of the Victoria Cross, sometimes called the Scarlet and the Bronze, meaning it was made of bronze in the shape of a Maltese cross. On top we have the British Lion with the royal crown and a scroll underneath saying, "For Valor," the award to Herman J. Good. I do have here, as part of my storytelling, some letters written by Corporal Good at the beginning and then Lance Sergeant toward the end of the war. And he writes both to his mother and his father. And I think in what I will read, we can get an idea of how there is a nobility of purpose in this second Anglo-Irish man. Dear Mother, well, don't worry about us. We will look after ourselves. And when our time comes, we will have to go. But we are living in hopes to come through safe. Ernest and I are together so far. Ernest, his brother, and he did not come back from the war. In a later letter to his father, he says, "Dear Father, this is the kind of thing which appeals so strongly to me. The men, my comrades, will work themselves to the breaking point to give another a chance for his life. Know full well that should I get hit, no trouble will be spared on their part to give me a fighting chance for my life." Relieving some of the worry and anguish, perhaps, of his father. A little later in the same letter, he muses philosophically about what life might be like if, in fact, he and others come home. How much we will appreciate the joy of living. Here, where all luxuries are withdrawn from us, we are none the less happy. We have our friends and loved ones at home, nature in all its beauty, music, pictures here. What more can a man ask for? We feel 'tis a joy to be alive at all. Such optimism for a man in the trenches with the rats, lice-infested, mud, cold. We feel 'tis a joy to be alive at all. Just now the birds are singing. In this war-stricken land, where there is hardly a branch to perch on, they are happy. Why should we not be as happy when God has given us greater scope to enjoy his wondrous works? In the midst of our many pleasures, we are apt to complain at our own selfish sorrows. We cannot have the green fields we love so much without the rain. The real sorrows we have only help us to enjoy to the full the pleasures that pass our way. Your loving son, Herman, France, August 20th, 1917. And just in closing, in a last letter, this is the very last letter we have, he's writing again to his father, and he says, "We are having beautiful weather over here now, and the fighting is pretty heavy." Imagine saying those two things in the same sentence. "Well, Father, I came through another pretty rough battle, but I near went it. Just a bomb. I had it in my pocket, perhaps a grenade, and it stopped the bullet. And lucky for me, the bomb did not explode." And one last commentary here. He's perhaps showing some empathy for the enemy. The general came up on horseback, the German general, and was driving his troops with a revolver into the jaws of death. As fast as they came, they fell, with their brave general by their side. Well, what do you think? Hero? A person widely admired? Ladies and gentlemen, in leaving now, I hope you have come to know these two Anglo-Irish men. You know, we have heroes, lots of heroes in many forms in life. Family heroes, friends who could be considered heroes. Some consider athletes or movie stars as heroes. But for me, these two historic figures who are noted for feats of courage, who have either lost their life like Anne or risked their life like Herman J. Goode, and had a nobility of purpose. To me, they make a real hero. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Shlante.
And last but not least, we'd like to introduce and welcome Fáilte Siobhán ní Rafaí. Siobhán is the Irish scholar at St. Thomas University in Fredericton, New Brunswick. In conjunction with the Irish Canadian University Foundation, she is also an advocate for the Irish language and culture. She was born and raised on the west coast of Ireland and has spent her lifetime immersing herself in the traditions of the Irish people. She holds a degree in the Irish language from the University of Limerick, along with a master's in education from the National University of Ireland, Galway, where she studied through the medium of Irish. She is inspired by her grandmother, Mary Duffy Scott, who at 96 still shares the same gra for traditional living as she did growing up in poverty in rural Ireland. Siobhán will speak about the lifetime of her grandmother, who has not only lived through global events such as World War II and the Troubles, but also became inadvertently involved in the latter when her son Thomas was killed in Sackville Place, Dublin in 1972. Please welcome Siobhán.
My grandmother's name is Mary Ellen Scott and her married name is Duffy. She was born on the 4th of August 1924 in a very small, isolated town on the west coast of Ireland, Ballycastle, County Mayo. She was the eldest of 5 siblings and her family never had much money. She would have spent days working on their small plot of land. She would have made candles from seal fat that they would have captured from the sea. They grew vegetables and they worked very hard. It was a rare day that my grandmother got to go to school, as she was busy at home minding the house, taking care of her siblings and doing the chores that women were expected to do at that time. She has told me a story of immigration, which I suppose rocked her family when she was very young. Her youngest sister, Ellen, was a couple of months old when one day her aunts came to the house. She remembers listening to them in the kitchen speaking about moving to America and bringing her sister Ellen with her. She remembers hiding her sister in a box so that her aunts wouldn't know that she was still in the house, to try and prevent them from bringing her with them to America. She was unsuccessful and her sister was brought with her aunts across the water in an attempt to give her a better life, which her family couldn't provide for her on the west coast of Ireland with very little. She also remembers her brother, Marty, moving to Halifax in Canada a couple of years after that. Once he became a teenager, an adult at that time, I suppose, he made his own decision to move abroad to provide a better life for him and to hopefully send home some money for her family. When my grandmother was 18 years old, she went through a phase of huge growth and she was involved in what I suppose I would deem an arranged marriage. She had been dating a local boy from Ballycastle and she was very happy. She goes as far as to say that she was in love with him. When one day a farmer who was 20 years her senior, so was 38 years old at the time, my grandmother being 18, came to their plot of land to visit and he proposed marriage to her. Well, not to her, but to her father. He told him that he would provide a good life for my grandmother, that he had land and money, and he only lived approximately 40 miles away from them. My grandmother was left with a decision as to whether to marry this man who could provide a very good life for her and her family down the line, or to stick with the man that she thought that she loved, who was nearby and maybe not so wealthy. She asked her friends, she asked her family, and one person would tell her to stay in Ballycastle, the other would say to go with this farmer who will provide a better life for you. She's a huge woman of faith and still to this day says her rosary day in and day out. So she decided that she would go to the local priest and ask for his opinion on what to do. She went and she asked and explained her story. Should she stick with true love, or should she go with this man who could provide a better life for her? The priest told her, go with this man who has land and who will provide for you and give you an easier life than you have had here on the west coast of the country. And so, a couple of weeks later, she married this man who has later become my grandfather, Michael Dhufaidh. She married him, and on the very same day she moved 40 miles away to a village called Park, which is just outside the county town of Castlebar in County Mayo. So as I said, it was 40 miles away, so she often travelled up and down by bicycle to visit her family and her parents who were still alive. She cycled those roads in weather of all conditions, and that shows her grit and determination and her undying love for her family. She did absolutely everything in her power to give them a better life. On the day of her marriage to this man, who I suppose she had spent very little time with, she moved to Park and moved into their new home. On her way into the house, she slipped and ended up breaking her arm. And that was a very enjoyable first day and night in her new home 40 miles away from the west coast. Over the next 25 years, she reared her 8 children. During that time, she experienced many miscarriages as the healthcare system in Ireland wasn't very strong at the time. And I suppose during those years, she worked very, very hard. She spent her time rearing the children, giving them good values, teaching them how to work on a farm. They had sheep, cattle, and hens. And the hens were a particular interest to my grandmother. She loved getting their eggs on a daily basis. She ate them and fed them to her children, but also baked with them. She'd often make brown bread and make apple tarts, as there were many apple trees on the farm. And she would also use the eggs in their dinners as well. During this time, she ate much traditional food, so she calls it fothy, agus callie, and fothy being potatoes, and callie being a dish made with mostly cabbage. So during this time, I suppose, they worked very hard, her husband, and my father and his brothers and sisters. But sadly, in 1972, a shock came to their family, to the door of a family that had worked hard all of their lives. On the 1st of December 1972, a bomb went off in Sackville Place in County Dublin. Sadly, my uncle Thomas Duffy and my grandmother's youngest son was involved in that bombing, and he lost his life on that day. It had been a normal December day. He had been working for CIE, which was our bus company at the time. He was a bus driver, and himself and his friend George Bradshaw were coming out of their headquarters in the centre of Dublin, just off O'Connell Street. They had heard rumblings of there being some sort of trouble that night, and all of a sudden a bomb went off, which had no repercussions. There were no fatalities from the first bomb. It had been a warning, but sadly it had a detrimental effect for my Uncle Thomas. He, given the fright that he had just gotten, ran with his friend George towards Sackville Place. In the space of those couple of minutes, the Belfast newspaper, a Belfast newspaper called The Newsletter, had received a warning from a distinctly British voice saying that there would be a second bomb in Dublin that night. The second bomb went off from a Ford estate which was parked on the side of the road. A £100 bomb went off, I suppose, without much other warning besides that warning that the newsletter had received. Thomas, my uncle, or Tommy as he was better known, and his friend George ran directly into that bomb. On that night it killed him, it killed George, and there were 107 fatalities. The bomb was very controversial. There had been a heated debate in Dáil that night on the Offences Against the State Act, which the Fianna Fáil party was trying to put into legislation. It had meant that any person who was suspected of a crime in relation to terror, or who was suspected of being a member of a terrorist organisation, could be interned without trial. They would go immediately to prison if the Gardaí or the police service here in Ireland suspected them of being involved in terrorism. This was a very heated debate. One side of our political organisations were for this change to the legislation, whereas one side of Dáil was completely against this. On that night, the bill was being debated, the bomb went off, and it resulted in the bill being passed and many members of the IRA being rounded up in the coming weeks and being put into prison. It seems that there were political aggravations for this bombing, and for that reason nobody has ever been arrested or nobody has been charged with these offences. And for my grandmother, Mary, she has spent many years of her life wondering, regretting and missing her son Tommy. Tommy had recently married just before the bombing. He had a young wife, he had a son who was a couple of months old, and his wife was expecting their second child. So for him to have lost his life, for my grandmother to have experienced yet another loss in her life, following on from the losses through immigration and the many miscarriages she had faced, it was another blow to what was already a difficult life. In the years that followed, my grandmother still remained in County Mayo, although many of her family members lived in Dublin, and she travelled up and down by train regularly to visit them, again maintaining the connection with her family, which was so important to her. During that time, I remember her going to Dublin, and I will never forget that feeling of excitement in my stomach when she was to come home. She always brought the best of presents for her grandchildren. She minded us, she took care of us, she washed, bathed, fed us like we were her own children. And I suppose she's a woman of true strength. And in 1990, she experienced yet another loss in her life when she lost her husband, Michael. He had died, I suppose, of old age. He was in his 80s at that stage, but it was a very hard blow for her to take. That, coupled with the loss of her brother, Paddy, and her other brother, Tommy, in the years that followed, resulted in my grandmother taking up something she had swore she never would. She never drank in her life, and still to this day is a pioneer. But in the weeks that followed those 3 deaths, she decided to take up smoking for the first time in her life. And my strongest memories of her as I was younger would be of her with a cup on tea in one hand, a cup of tea, and a cigarette in the other. She smoked from morning till night, and that got her through each and every day. During those years, she still worked very hard on the farm that we have at home. Her son Michael, who is my father, took over the farm as my grandfather died, and we all were reared in the same home that my grandmother had lived in once she moved to Park. So she remained with her son Michael, his wife Mary, my parents, and my brothers and sisters. So we had a very happy home for many years, and my grandmother worked and worked and worked for us. She continued to bake bread, and she continued to take care of her family as she had done from the day she was born. She always reminded us of the many links that we have with the other side of the Atlantic, with Halifax in Nova Scotia and with New Jersey in America, where her sister Ellen eventually based herself. Her sister Ellen finally got back in contact with her family after many years of being away and growing up in New Jersey. And herself and my grandmother remained in constant contact. They were very good friends. They were sisters. And finally, in the year 2000, it was decided that Ellen would come to Ireland for a visit. My grandmother was very excited. It was never possible that she would fly to New Jersey. She had never been on a plane in her life. But Ellen was to come to visit at Easter of 2000. She was in good health. Although she was getting older, she was in perfect health. And it came as a huge blow to my grandmother to find out suddenly, 2 weeks before this trip, that Ellen had passed away of a sudden death. It was a final blow to her that I don't know how she's still gotten over to this day. So she never met her sister from the moment that she was taken away when she was small by her aunts to America. She never saw her again, which is a very sad tale, I suppose. My grandmother, again, a woman of true courage and grit and determination, managed to put this behind her, try and move on and live as much of a life as she could for herself, despite these many blows. She, as I mentioned, she reared me and my sisters and brothers, and she did everything in her power to give us a happy and healthy life. In 2018, she had an accident at home one day. It was a fine summer's day, and as always, she was going outside to have her cigarette. She had taken up the habit of having it outside, just in case she was to pass on any damage from smoke to her beloved son, daughter-in-law, or her grandchildren. On her way out the door, as she was going out to smoke this cigarette, she tripped and ended up breaking her hip. And this was a very traumatic experience for her, but it also deteriorated her health quite a lot. From that time in 2018 up until now, she has moved into a nursing home in our local town. There, she's very happy. She has made new friends, and she still speaks fondly of her many memories of growing up on the west coast of Ireland. She tells us stories of emigration, of loss, of sadness, but also great hope for a good life and for us to live a happier, safer, and more educated life than she ever got to live.